Record. All right, we are recording. Hi, everybody who is just tuning in or maybe watching at home. This is Christian Gray Moore. I'm with Yale Studios in the Superhero Training Center. I'm joined with Frank Caeti. Is it pronounced Caeti? I probably should have
Caeti.
clarified. Caeti. Look at that. Let's stop record, re-record, cancel this whole thing. Frank Caeti.
No, it's okay. Right.
Frank Caeti is joining us from LA. He's going to be giving you guys some information on how to turn your improv skills into some money in your future, as well as maybe money right now. We'll see. Frank is going to be giving us a rundown. Frank is also teaching an amazing class later, starting this upcoming Monday the 13th. That class is called Creating a Pitch Packet and is available. It is a 4-week class running each Monday for the next 4 Mondays. Let me show a little. Let's do a screen share on that. About share screen. Boom. So this is that class right here. You can find that at superherotrainingcenter.com/classes. It is a limited amount of people available for that class, so sign up as soon as you can. We've still got a few slots left. All right. That is the end of my plug. And Frank, I'm going to let you take it away as soon as I stop sharing screen.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is gonna be weird because I'm gonna have to talk about myself for a while, which I'm not a huge fan of. But hopefully, I can impart some wisdom to you about the path that I took and that others have taken, that can kind of shed some light on where you can go with some improv training, because I'd say 99% of people that do improv do it for free. Wayne Brady and Colin Mockery and Ryan Stiles get paid, but they're probably the much the exception of the people that can make a living off of doing improv. And they all have other jobs as well anyways. But I'm going to take you through that. You can ask questions, and if specific, I'll try to be kind of brief with what my path was. But specifically for me, I didn't necessarily know what it was going to lead to. I was just very much attracted to it. I'm originally from Chicago, and I went to school in Colorado. And in Colorado, I got interested in theater. My majors, technically, I have a degree in rhetoric, the art of persuasion, which is applicable to everything, but doesn't get you a job in anything. And you need some sort of grad work or something. But I enjoyed it. It was very academic and scholarly, and I ended up adding a minor of acting and directing. And somewhere in college, I had seen Second City when I was a kid, but I had gone back home on a break and saw Second City, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So I had set a plan, and post-graduation from college, I went back to Chicago and started studying. And Chicago is a pretty great place for training in sketch comedy and improv, and could very well be maybe one of the best places. It's arguable for everybody because there's great scenes proliferating all over the country and great teachers, and the world has shrunk, which is great, by the internet and Zoom and all that stuff. But I had some training in improv and acting and directing, but I clearly needed a lot more. So I went to Chicago, and my whole path the entire time was to be a performer. And so I'll talk a little bit about how diversifying my career, writing, directing, doing other stuff came later. But my initial track was performing and improvising. That's what I loved and wanted to learn to do. So I immersed myself in the scene in Chicago and took classes at Second City and IO and The Annoyance. And I interned to save money, and I performed for one person, sometimes literally one person in the crowd, and waited tables and did all the stuff I needed to do, and probably spent a fair amount of time drinking and not being productive because it was my 20s. So that's what part of it is for. You're learning to be an adult. But it was an intensely creative time, and I was very fortunate to get opportunities. And I think that's one thing everybody, you have to create those opportunities for yourself, or at the very least be prepared for those opportunities when they come along. So that means persistence and auditioning and doing your stuff. And I think now the world is even, writer creators have not an easy time, but an easier time, because we all carry an HD camera in our pocket and we can create content and do so much stuff that we couldn't do when I was starting out. You needed way more expensive equipment and all that sort of stuff. So I went down the path and studied with some great teachers in Chicago. It's an amazing scene for comedy, specifically sketch and improv, and was lucky to get involved in a troupe called Comedy Sports in Chicago, which is short form. And that was one of the first places that I started working, and then performed at IO for several years on Herald teams. And then was lucky to get hired for Second City in their national touring company. Did that for a couple of years. Then I was promoted to the resident company, where I wrote 2 reviews. And during that time in Chicago, I was auditioning and had an agent and tried to do, as much as I can. I was fortunate to be making my living as an actor in Chicago. So at some point I abandoned my bartending job and was making enough through theater and commercials. Were pretty big in Chicago at the time. There's actually more production there now in television and film, but there was some. And so I booked little things here and there, and that really helped. But I still very much was on the track of being a performer. And so I was kind of inundating myself in that world and on that track. At the Second City, if you're not familiar, the performer is the writer and the writer is the performer on the resident company. So you are a writer. And the idea being, if you are an improviser, then you are a writer, because when you improvise, you're writing on your feet. The difference is when you write it, you're putting it in some sort of tangible state. I would not say I was a writer when I started this journey. I was an improviser. And so it took that training and people encouraging me to say, you're creating material on stage, extemporaneously. You can write. Easier said than done, but you can do that. So if you are a person that has an improv background and don't consider yourself a writer, or consider yourself a writer, guess what? You are. The difference is the tangibility. And so the good thing about writers, especially if they come from an improv background, is we're prolific. Get up on stage, do a scene, play through an idea. That seems relatively easy to me. Sit at a terminal and write a funny script, that seems difficult. It seemed more difficult back then. So I was struggling with that, but realizing that I could do those sorts of things. But by no means would I consider myself a writer. So I was in that scene and I was making a decent living, lucky enough to be in the unions in SAG-AFTRA and Actors Equity, and got an opportunity when I was at Second City, which is a great showcase, but has its own bureaucracy to survive and get to that point of being on the resident company. So people would come and scout talent. The Daily Show and SNL and Mad TV and all these kinds of places would come. And so I was lucky in my second show to get the attention of some people, and a very long story with my SNL Chronicle. If you've ever listened to the podcast Improv Nerd with Jimmy Carrane, you can listen to that because I could talk about that for a long time. But I ended up not working at SNL, but I went there and had a bunch of meetings and those sorts of things happen. But during that same time, I had a development deal with a place called Sony Pictures Television. And I was developing a television show with them. And then that show died while I was in Chicago. It was great. I was like, I'm doing my job. And then Sony came and saw it and we're like, we want to develop a show with some of you guys. And we started creating a show and we got paid, and it seemed like a ton of money for us in Chicago at the time. And I would still take that money now, but it was not a ton of money. It wasn't life altering. It made for a good year, let's say that. But I wasn't like, now I'm rich, I can buy a house with a pool. It wasn't that at all. And then Mad TV came and went through that whole process, auditioning in Chicago, auditioning in Los Angeles, testing for the network at Fox, and I got hired. And so my first year on the show, the way my contract was, it didn't necessarily make sense for me to move to Los Angeles. So my wife had a job in Chicago, a good job, and I stayed in Chicago and I just came to Los Angeles when we were in production. Um, then I still wouldn't consider myself a writer, but there I had to write even more because if I wanted to get on the show, I had to pitch ideas and write ideas or collaborate with the writing staff. So I was like, oh, I have to do this. Now I had just come off of my Second City experience, where it's very collaborative, an ensemble of 6 people, all endeavoring to essentially do the same thing, um, uh, working together to create the best show possible. Now I'm doing it for an hour-long television show every week. It's just the circumstances were quite different with a budget of $800,000 per episode. Like it was just a lot more pressure. But I had to be a writer. Well, I had pitched and done certain things, but I had to start to adjust my writing. And I got comfortable with it, more comfortable with the actual formatting of writing, more comfortable with the way, because most shows have their own style as far as how the writer's room is run, how the head writer and all of that pitch process occurs. But it wasn't like entirely said like you have to write, but it was very much like if you want to get on the show and create original characters, you should write or at least pitch and collaborate. So that all happened. And I was at the show for a few seasons, and then I left that show, and then that show eventually got canceled. But now I was living in Los Angeles and going, what are my skills? Like, what do I do now? And so I was fortunate to have good management and good representation. And I actually told Christian this story. At the time that I had left Mad TV, I had gotten an opportunity to be a staff writer on a television show, and I was offered a thing, and I said no. I was very naive. And my thought was at that time, if I cross over to the side of writing, I'll never get back to performing, which is my first love and the thing that interests me the most. And at that time, there was a little bit of that like you're either a writer or a performer, you're not both. Well, cut to 2020, and that's just simply not the case anymore. And people have blazed a trail for us. Issa Rae and who else did we talk about yesterday? Donald Glover. Even to a certain extent, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck did it in 1998 with Good Will Hunting. They were not happy with the roles they were getting offered and opportunities they had in Hollywood, so they created for themselves. They have not written a thing since, but that one thing opened a gigantic door for them. Right? They've done Project Greenlight and other producing and stuff, but they're not writing stuff anymore. But that got them in. I was dumb and I didn't know, and it was different then. But there's so many writer creators now. And I think the best shows are created by people that have a point of view. And so it made me kind of realize, oh, I need to diversify. I was the dummy. So the reason we're doing this webinar is so you're not me. I'm the cautionary tale. Because I was kind of sitting there going, I'm going to be a performer. I was on this TV show and then wait for another TV show. And that's not easy to do. I didn't know. I was in Chicago doing a theater job I loved. I lived across the street. I had a great life. I was making enough money to do whatever I needed to do in Chicago. I was not rich, but I was fine. And then they hired me for a TV show. I was like, yeah, I'll go to LA. And then not realizing how much work it is business-wise in Los Angeles. So that brought me to, okay, I have this set of skills. I'm relatively young. What do I do with them? All of my training, for the most part, had been like formally acting, directing, and improvising. I did not direct a whole lot. I directed in college, but I didn't really direct a whole lot. I directed a couple things here and there in Chicago, but was not my thrust. And I would literally rather go play theater league softball than go to rehearsal to direct something. Like I was living that life. But I had the circumstances of where I was now, not on a television show, but living in Los Angeles and going, what way can I go? So by necessity, I diversified. What did I do? I tried to work as much as I can in any aspect that I could. So I started writing. I had a partner, one of my best buds. He's my improv husband. His name is Matt Craig. He used to write for SNL, and now he's a producer on the Netflix show. He's one of my best friends. He was the officiant at my wedding. We started writing and creating shows together on spec meaning for free. We're just like, let's write. We got time. We're here. We're doing it. Let's do this to help get us attention, to help get us literary agents. I started teaching more. I started directing plays and sketch comedy shows and one-person shows, and I had some experience at Second City working in their corporate division. So I started trying to see how I could work in that regard. I was joking with Christian yesterday saying, nobody wants to teach corporate improv. Nobody goes like, oh, I want to do this. But like, it can be very lucrative. And if I'm spreading the gospel of something that I love very much, that I think can benefit people, because a lot of people have no improv training, and they're like, wait, all I have to do is listen to people and have this idea of acceptance and building off of what they say. That's mind blowing. But corporate culture is no but. So I started doing more of that stuff. So I had gotten an opportunity to work with Marriott, the hotel company. And for 5 years, I was one of their facilitators and instructors for their global leadership program. It's a global company. They have hotels all over the world. And so 5 or 6 times a year, I would fly somewhere and teach a bunch of their leaders using improv, spend an afternoon with them. It was super fun. And it was worth going there. You know what I mean? It wasn't going to be a yearly salary, but I literally went for like what for 6 times a year would be maybe a total of 15 days total, but made up a minimum of a third of my income for that year. So that was a thing that I could do, taking that training that I learned from teaching. I've been an instructor at Second City for more than 17 years now, and have been on faculty in Chicago, Las Vegas, and here in Hollywood. And so taking that knowledge, and I tell these people when I do corporate workshops, I've never had a real job in my life. Like, I don't know your life. I've never reported to an office in that way. I'm very fortunate, and I recognize that privilege that I have. So I can't claim to know somebody else's thing. So I invite them into our world and something that we know, and how collaboration and and communication, effective communication and listening can really inform people's work. So that's one way. That's one avenue. Some of you may never ever get paid to do your creative endeavor, but improv can still inform your life in what you do. And that's a really important thing for, I think, people to realize that, hey, look, I may not end up on SNL. It's such a small sliver of people that are going to get that opportunity. But there's so much you can do with that training. Because again, as I said early on, most people aren't going to get paid to do it. That's just the way that it is. But how can you take that training? As a director, what do I do? So going on that corporate way, can you as a leader use your improvisational training to recognize how to be a leader with people, how to communicate with people, how to create and foster an environment where people feel heard and ideas are incorporated? If somebody raises their hand and says, I have an idea, and someone says, we can't do that, then most of the time you're facilitating a place where people are going to have less ideas. Now, you can't indulge everything. We need a time and space to do so, and we need a time and space to create. Every place has to set that space, right? You know, even in the SNL or Mad TV structure, we have a space of time where we write, and then we have a space of time where we have to debut that material and evaluate it. But the generative stage is different than the evaluative stage. So you can use these tenets and things that you learn about creating material, working with people, all those tenets of improvisation and collaboration, which is in the touchy-feely artist world, but not in the corporate world, is a way for you to use this training. Back to the other side. Matt and I were writing. We were getting more comfortable writing. We had some shows get close. We almost sold a show to CBS, but we didn't get it. We were young and didn't know better, but it drew attention. So we got other opportunities from that. So just, I would not, at that time, I wouldn't say I'm a writer. I'm like, I'm writing so I can, every time I wrote too, by the way, I'm giving myself a part, right? Like I may not make myself the lead, but I'm writing with me being in it, right? Because I want to be a performer first. And now less and less. If you were to ask me now, I don't know if I would say that. I would still say I love it, and that's the thing, a feeling that I miss, but might be okay without doing it. So I got more and more comfortable writing. Still collaborative. It's still difficult for me to write by myself. I wrote for a show on Cartoon Network called New Looney Tunes for a few seasons, and I had to work alone on that. And the way that the staffing worked, and this is something that's happening more in the industry, which is kind of a bummer, is they're staffing people freelance. So they're not staffing people to come into work. You're freelance. So you get a job and then you work from home, which is, for the pandemic, is great, but this was pre-pandemic. So as an improviser, we work great in rooms. SNL loves improvisers. They hire their people from either mostly improv, stand-up, or the Harvard Lampoon. And they all work differently. But most people that know improvisers work better in a setting where they collaborate. So I prefer to collaborate, had to learn to get comfortable to write alone. Still not 100% with that, but because it just comes easier to me to work on dialogue and play with somebody by having someone to listen to and shoot ideas around with. But I've gotten more comfortable and I can do it. But there still is something mildly daunting about staring at a screen and starting. The good news is, if you're a person who's never written, once you write, once it's on paper in your Google Drive, on your hard drive, it is tangible. It exists. That's cool. So the hardest thing to do about being a writer is starting to write. So write. In that, I started directing more. So I got an opportunity to direct something, and it was a finished thing that was written. So I was just directing it as like a theatrical director. Learned from that. It went pretty well. Started to work with more people, work with people developing shows, work with people before the show is even ready. So in the part where they're writing, so I'm helping develop material as well. I found strength in that and started to get lucky with projects going really well. One of which was a show that I co-wrote and directed that ended up playing off Broadway last year, and played in LA and Chicago and eventually New York off Broadway. And so that went well beyond our wildest dreams of where it can go. And it was using so much of my training from improv and learning the things I learned from collaboration to how to get it there. And it was a real eye-opening experience to bring it to New York, which was, we had very much of like theatrical people and Broadway theatrical people producing the show. And that was a very different process. So learning that, because we were coming in with like the yes and we're gonna incorporate everybody's ideas and think about this and stuff. We want to raise the show up and everything. And we're like, oh, they're playing by different rules than we are. So trying to flexibility and adaptability. Improvisation is adaptability in the moment. So if you can't do that, then you're not improvising, right? So life is improv, all this stuff. So I have found that improvisers are some of my favorite people in the world because of that adaptability, because of their ability to find the cracks and work within them, because they're generally fun and funny people. There are certainly some jerks out there and systems that need to be challenged and bureaucracies that need to be challenged. But I just find as a group of people, improvisers are great people to work with because of all the things I said. And also,
Frank, I'm going to hop in for 1 second if that's,
of course.
If you haven't also, that's fine.
But well, also because they're just funny, because being around fun and funny people is nice.
Yeah. I always enjoy being around improvisers. It's and I like your statement about bringing improv to the corporate world, because it definitely does feel like, let me introduce you to my cult and all the benefits of it. and come join us. It's phenomenal. But I've got a couple questions that people have sent in.
Sure.
And if you have questions, you can send them to the main chat, or you can direct message them to me on there as well if you want to keep your name hidden. Anyway, so I have one. Do you start an idea when you, oh, sorry, let me read this properly. Do you start with an idea and improvise with it, or do you start in the improv and then form the idea out of the improv and then come back to it?
It depends on what you're creating, but I would say both. Um, so I was, when this pandemic hit, I was in Chicago directing a Second City resident company show. We were 6 weeks into our process, and now we have no idea when we'll go back. On day one in the Second City process, we have zero material. The cast is creating it together. The director acts as the director, but also almost as like a head writer. So with trained improvisers, I can put them on stage and have them improvise, and we would do it a lot in the improv sets or in the show. And we can watch a scene that we don't know is an idea yet, and then cull an idea from that. So pull an idea out of it. The other way is somebody can come in with some sort of pitch or like a very loose idea, half baked, quarter baked, full baked idea, and say, I have this idea for blank. All right, well, let's improvise through it. So the Second City method is typically, but not always, but the way that they train you is using improvisation to create sketch material. So I'm open to both. So in our process in Chicago, when I was there, I started in late January. There would be some pitches that people would bring in as scripts, some pitches that were a sentence, or some that were just an improv. And we're like, oh, that could be a scene. Let's talk about this. Or that character is really fun. Can we find a way to incorporate that character into a scene? So I will take content any way I can get it.
Phenomenal. Now, another one coming in from, let's see, this is about the Marriott piece. So how do you start getting into corporate training? So was there a direct route for you into that, or do you see people coming from kind of the same backgrounds?
Well, definitely working with Second City's corporate division, which is called Second City Works, but people in Chicago call it BizCo, helped me and facilitating. And that does require a different set, potential polish and stuff, because some corporate America is pretty buttoned up. And so you can't be like coming in being like your colorful artistic self, like, hey fuckers, let's get in a circle. Like, you can't be that guy. You have to have some corporate polish. But what I found from my path was a lot of people that I knew recognized how financially wonderful that could be, and see how much work that can exist. So I've known people who have branched off and created their own like things, uh, and their own little companies that do corporate work. Um, and the way the Marriott thing came to me was kind of knowing people, like your own little network. Um, but it was a buddy of mine who had worked in for a creative firm that worked with Marriott on a different project, and they had asked about incorporation of improv. And he's like, it's a friend I've known since junior high. He's like, one of my oldest, dearest friends could help us with this. And I created this workshop, a one-off workshop in Chicago. And little did I know it was like the higher ups at Marriott, like the daughter of Mr. Marriott. Like, she was like, whatever, like literally. And I didn't know. I'm just some Yahoo that flew in and did this thing. And they loved it. And then that begat more work. So then they included it into they started, can you develop this for our global leadership program? And then from that, the thing that was pretty dope was when I was doing those global leadership trainings, everybody I was teaching in those workshops were leaders themselves. So they had their own network. So many times they would be like, oh, we have this meeting coming up. This would be amazing to have. Could you come to Atlanta? Could you come to Toronto and do this thing? And so that helps. So the work begat work, and the network kind of blew up. Marriott has acquired in the last couple of years Starwood, which is like, I can't remember what, but like that's another huge hotel company. So they went through a bunch of restructuring and their leadership programs altogether went away. So then that's our job went away. But what I found is, I'm not on LinkedIn, but like people in the corporate world love networking, love to be the person who brings somebody in. So getting that first job and doing a good job will help you. And I mean, that's in everything. Like the thing I would say across the board is be a pleasure to work with. There's a lot of assholes out there and they're rewarded unfairly. But if you are a pleasure to work with and you're hardworking and you take it seriously and you do a good job and you're a delight, that will get you more work. It's not the only thing, but it's a way.
Oh,
You're
I started talking before I unmuted myself. Very classic. Yeah, that's something that we talked about yesterday, and I definitely agree. I mean, there's something to be said about just being a pleasure to work with. It's way easier to bring someone back that is just enjoyable to be around. In addition to, I got talk less, smile more. We were just talking about how we've been watching Hamilton nonstop. So love it.
Well, I would say like, don't be, you should have integrity, right? Like, but I would also say like the smartest people I know, and this is something that I'm bad at, the show part of show business, I love. The business part of show business, I don't love. And I could be way better at it. And openly ambitious people that network hard and do all that stuff, they're sometimes rewarded. And I think that's gross. I'm from the Midwest. I prefer to let my work speak for itself and say, this is what I'll lead with. But some of the time that just doesn't work in Hollywood. In Hollywood, you got to be like, I'm so good at everything. I'm so good at this. I can do this. I got this. I got an album. I do TV shows. I can juggle, whatever the fuck. But like, hold on, sorry, there were children over there.
Maybe those children are very excited to learn, though. They
maybe
need to know some of this
they'll be like, mommy, what does that mean?
Mommy, get me in a level 1 class.
But like, I don't think you should, because like talk less, smile more. I'm super familiar with Hamilton. I'm not saying you should be an Aaron Burr, but be the best version of yourself. And I think energy and positivity is a choice. If you want to be a pain in the ass, then you're running the risk of people not working with you. Like that's the difference in my opinion of like what, how improvisers and stand-ups are different. Because stand-ups, you can be a total curmudgeon, not want to talk to anybody, a cynical piece of shit, and you'll be great at it because you don't have to work with anybody. But in improv, you have to work with people. Like the best people I know are kind, lovely people. Yes, we all have jerks among us. We all have our moments of being a jerk. But if the lion's share of our work is a pleasure to work with, collaborative, people will take notice of that. And frankly, you're just too expendable. There's too many people lined up to do the work that are going to be easier to work with. So don't make that a reason that nobody wants to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to highlight a piece that you said earlier, talking about LinkedIn and talking about kind of being where people are. If your goal is to be in one of these, in corporate or in any type of training setup, a big piece of it is you have to be where those people are meeting people and have to be where they're connecting to people. Now, it could be through your own network of friends or however you're finding people, but LinkedIn, Alignable, any of those sources are really great for just getting your name out there and getting connected with those people. I got a couple more questions coming in for you, Frank. How did you get your first literary agent, and who was it? What was that process?
Our very first one was through APA, Agency for the Performing Arts. Is a large agency in Los Angeles and New York, and I think they may have an office in Nashville. It is not a top 5. There's like the big 5, CAA, ICM, William Morris, Endeavor, UTA. And I worked with them, and then I started working with them theatrically. There are long stories of where you pop around sometimes. I was with the same manager for 15 years. I just separated from him last year, but that was where we started. Matt and I got the same uh, people looking out for us there.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Was there
And
a second part to that question?
just
Sorry.
how did you first get that first meeting and get that?
Oh, yes. Writing on spec. So definitely there are tons in Hollywood. There are tons of gatekeepers, and that sucks. And I hate it. And that's, as I said, I don't love the business part of it. But my manager opened doors and said, "Hey, I have these guys that are writing this thing. They're working on this. They're really funny. They do a theatrical show. You should come check them out." So we would have Matt and I were doing a show called Frank and Matt. Very, very clever title. And we were doing improv and we did some sketch shows. So we were staying prolific. And it was always nice for people to come check us out. We started doing some videos that we could send to people because, you know, pre-pandemic, it's still a lot to get an agent to come down and see your show, even if it's 5 miles. Like one of the biggest festivals is Just for Laughs in Montreal. And basically all of LA and New York descend upon Montreal for a few days so they could see this talent that they could all probably drive 2 miles and see year round. But there's gatekeepers that have, evaluated the talent and said, oh, if you're good enough to get into JFL, then you're probably pretty good and we should take notice of you. So that happens, but my manager helped facilitate that. You definitely need an advocate. It's hard, whether that be somebody in the business, and like that has helped. Like you never know, like my generation of like Second City or like Chicago talent has really wide reach. There are people that are, no longer in the business to people that are, virtually household names. So knowing those people and knowing that reputation can always help too. We talk about like throwing the rope down, like say, who can you bring with you if that's an opportunity? So those networks and stuff help, but also my manager in that particular thing was pitching me to his people. They have their own network, of people that they talk to.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, and just getting more people in your camp and getting more people in your network that do see you as a talented person and somebody that can vouch for you and know you well. And I think that's a great thing to talk about. Your class experience is, if you're in classes and you're performing and you're training, that network grows because you have teachers that see your skills. You have other directors that are coming to your shows that can vouch for your skills. And those are great people to work with and reach out to. I have another question coming from the chat. As performers and writers, specifically improvisers, do you think there is a blind spot that improvisers commonly have in their training that is something that they need to work towards to overcome?
Yeah, determination and procrastination. People that are improvisers will sometimes lack a little bit of determination, uh, and they will procrastinate or rest on their ability to come up with that in the moment. But you need to practice. You need to do the work. Um, like going back to even like meetings or having meetings with people, depending on who you are and who you're meeting with and how big that meeting is, you may practice that. So like my manager with certain things, like especially with television pitches, before we would go out, we would have practice pitches where we would do the pitch, get notes, that sort of stuff. So we had to prepare, because once we get to HBO, we can't be like, like we got to be ready to go. We're getting 20, 30 minutes of their time. This is our shot. We're not going to throw away our shot.
Yeah, we're actually going to do our entire webinar and workshop series based on Hamilton references from here on.
I'll see if I can. I'll try to fold some in.
Yeah, we're going to have
Don't
be a burr.
Don't be a burr.
We'll make you
Yep.
satisfied. No, that sounds more sexual than it was intended, but yeah, this is great. So speaking of pitching, what a great segue over to nice. Now the chat's starting to send me messages. What
But
a
no, but
great
you're joking on that, but that is true. Like in the play, one of the reasons that Hamilton gets ahead is that he's nonstop, right?
He is
Is that he
nonstop.
works harder than everybody else. Like he's amazingly talented. He's smart as shit, but he still has to out hustle too, you
Yeah,
know? So
absolutely.
like if there's anything you can learn from that is you still got to hustle.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always liked the mentality of you can be the most talented person in the room, but if you're not the hardest working person in the room, you're eventually going to fall behind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, I mean, that's true. It's been true my entire life, and it continues to be true. So, but yeah, speaking of pitching, if you are someone that is interested in pitching shows or pitching your ideas, we are running a pitch workshop that we talked about at the beginning. Would you mind just giving us a little tidbit about what you're going to be covering in that 4-week program and some selling points for kind of getting you towards that?
Certainly. Um, so it's called creating a pitch packet. A pitch packet is something that you would create in order to take a show out to be pitched. So it isn't specifically, it is somewhat addressing the process of pitching and how you get there, but it is more so addressing the preparation you need to do, the work you need to do, the writing you need to do before you get there. And most of the time, almost all pitch packets are written on spec. There are some people that are paid or have an overall deal with a studio, but most of them are on pitch. Um, a packet is created before the show is sold, and that includes famous people. Um, you have to bring in an idea and prove that it is viable to run for however many seasons, or to be unique enough to work. Um, And so it covers all of those sorts of things. So it takes us from what an idea is versus a premise for a television show, and then the components of what a pitch packet would look like. So the subcomponents being things like what's the log line of the show, character descriptions, structure, device, series narrative or arc, seasonal arc, all that sort of stuff. So you have a good idea with a good idea what this show is, with the main idea of you create a pitch packet, so then hopefully they love the show so much they'll pay you to write the pilot. That's the ideal circumstance. Some of the time you got to write the pilot on spec as well, but the reason that industry wise some of the time you want to avoid writing a pilot is if you hand a pilot to a studio or a network, they may feel it's too baked. What do I mean by that? It means you've gone too far down the road for them to have input and justify their jobs. So, because you can bring a show idea to HBO and that show would look different than that show would if it were on CBS, right? So they're going to want to infuse what's right for their network. But if you come and there's a malleability, again, coming back to your improv training, of going to a place with a show that may allows for their input. I've done this before, which is gone in with a packet. I wrote the pilot already, but I don't tell anybody that I have the pilot.
Yeah, get paid for that time.
Yeah. And they're going to have influence and notes anyways. They're going to give you notes. They have to. They have to justify their jobs. And they're smart people. They know, like, again, these are people that know the business part of show. If it were just creative people running show business, it would be a lot different. So, like, it's for money. It's a for-profit thing. Like, and as much I have general disdain for the suits, I recognize that they serve a purpose. What I don't like about it is sometimes in Hollywood, it feels like for every one creative, there are 10 suits who are sucking off of our creativity. That's what I don't like. Have I made it clear that I have disdain for the business of show?
I haven't quite heard it yet. If it seems like you're real enjoying the business of acting is what I'm getting.
It's
Hollywood
just like,
business, love it.
yeah, it's just people profiting off of other people is what I don't love.
Yeah, make
But
sure to
they do
add
have a
Frank
skill.
on LinkedIn, everybody. Uh,
So anyways, the class will take issue that in that, what we would do in the process is you would have writing assignments every week. We would present some of those things. You would get feedback on some of those things. You could have a fully fleshed out idea, or you could have just a very like uh, kernel of an idea, and the class will force you to build that out. So it could come from either way. You could have written a pilot, and then you're like, now I want to structure it into a packet. So there's many ways that you could go about it based on where you are. And we would give you feedback and kind of usher you through the journey of creating that, with the idea, an ultimate goal of you having a pretty good idea of what your pitch packet would look like. And when I say that, a pitch packet is technically not a document that you would ever really even hand off. Most of the time, you don't. You don't give the studio or network anything. Maybe you would give them what's called a one sheet, which you would learn in the workshop, but it's internal. It's all your stuff. It's all your homework that you have and you bring to your pitch and that you know inside and out. So when they go, like, what does episode 5 look like? And you're like, well, here's what it is. And so that's what the class would cover.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. And if you're a person like me, who talking about the blind spots of an improv training background, I definitely am similar, as you were talking about. Sitting down and writing at a terminal is one of the hardest things that I have to overcome. And having deadlines, having, a person that's going to be holding me accountable and having deadlines set is the best way that I've found for myself to get work done. It's like, if I know I'm going to be, Monday, I'm going to be on with Frank, and I know he's going to ask me about my log lines. If I have my log line ready, if I have my one sheet ready, etc., I've got to get it done.
Yeah, I think we all probably work better with deadlines. Shonda Rhimes has a great master class about her process for creating shows, and one of the things she says is, when you're creating your packet and doing this developmental work and background work on the show, that's when you actually have time, because once you get to production, you don't have that time to indulge anymore. You have to be ready. If you're still writing stuff as you're going to shoot it, you're screwed. You're behind, So that's an important thing. I had a friend who I worked with on her musical, and she wanted to write a semi-autobiographical show, but she never found the time to do it. So she enrolled in a class just so she would have the deadlines. And by the end of it, she had this show mostly created. And then when she was done, we started working on it, and it was going really well. It's such a funny show called Supportive White Parents. It's about a young Filipino girl whose both of her parents are immigrants and they're doctors. And they expected her to be a doctor, and she wanted to go into theater. And it's really silly and fun, and about her wishing for supportive white parents. But
Awesome.
she used the class, and she was like, it was the best money I ever spent, because over 8 weeks at the end of it, I had a tangible script. Doesn't mean that you can't change that thing. We could edit for years, but once it becomes tangible in your hard drive or on a piece of paper, then it exists. That's what I think is the thing. I will not underestimate the difficulty of starting to write. That's really hard. But the thing that's cool is, once it's there in front of you, it's just that. It's there in front of you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, anecdotally, my girlfriend is an actress and a writer as well, and she actually had 2 plays that she was working on, and kind of a similar thing. It sat on her desktop for months and months and months. Hopped in a class and had 2 finished plays by the end of an 8-week class that she's now was actively performing right before quarantine started. So we'll see how that picks back up. But yeah. So coming from Justin, he asks, how do you write if not at a computer? Are you just recording your improv, or how do you go about writing in that way?
Yeah. I mean, everybody's process is different, but whatever you think is good. So like at Second City, when we were creating, we record rehearsal and shows. So we record while we're in rehearsal, while anything in the show or anything in the improv set. The improv set at Second City being, when you would go see a resident company show, you would essentially see a 2-act sketch comedy show that may have some improvisational elements, But then there's a third act that is all improvised typically. And that's free to the public, or for the people that just saw the show, they can stay and watch. And so that's a great spot to try out material and stuff. So we record that. So playback is your friend. I know that a lot of actors, you may have insecurities about watching yourself, and that's not the most fun thing to do. But if you look at it technically to improve your performance and content, then I think it's an enormously valuable tool. And for me, I would say, yeah, I mean, getting up in front of a crowd and improvising a scene is an infinitely easier and more fun idea to me than writing a page of dialogue. So I would much rather do that. Also, we get energized by feedback, right? Especially in comedy, where if they're responding to something, then our brain, the hamster's working even faster to give us more ideas. Sometimes when you're sitting there and you're like, and there's nobody laughing, it's rough, right? So if you work better in front of a crowd, then find a way to work in front of a crowd. The other thing I would say is uh, you do eventually have to go back to a terminal and work on it, but use preview, use audiences, do stage readings, send it to your friends, do readings for 6 people, get their feedback. Anything you can do will help you. I also say take feedback with a grain of salt, but let it make you think about the material. So I love writers that stick to their guns, but you can't just be obstinate or stubborn to be stubborn. You have to have a reason behind it. So if anything, when someone asks you about material or gives you feedback, it should make you think deeper about it. And then maybe you'll find a reason to justify why that thing should or shouldn't stay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Another question: what are some things that we can be doing as improvisers and performers right now to work on ourselves and also work towards that goal, both in quarantine
Yeah,
and then hopefully once quarantine stops?
that's a good question. I mean, it's tough. I think we're all in the same thing. And I'm sure we have as artists, a fair amount of like existential crises where we're really trying to find what our purpose is in this time. And I think first and foremost, survive. Like, you know, uh, we're experiencing a pandemic. It's unprecedented. Hopefully, it's the only thing we ever see in our lifetime like this. So you got to take care of yourself, and that's self care is a part of you as an artist. And so if you aren't working, I think it's okay. Stay alive. Boom. See, good job, Joshua. There you go. We got another
Yeah,
Hamilton
let's get those Hamilton references in.
I'm gonna finish with the Dear Theodosia. It'll be real ham-handed in there. um, but I have 2 kids, a 6 and a 9-year-old. So I'm a homeschool dad with my wife. My wife just finished grad school. So like that's gonna win over my projects that I'm not gonna be paid for right now. So I think we have to take care of ourselves and our loved ones and whatever we need to do first and foremost. Uh, but it doesn't mean that you can't do little steps to get better every day. So whatever that means. Uh, Christian and I were talking yesterday. One thing that is actually still going forward, writing is still going forward. They're having virtual writing rooms. So TV shows are still preparing. Production isn't happening as much. Animation is the same right now. It is unaffected because people are recording from home, or they're finding ways to make recording sessions socially distanced, which they already are. You'd be in a booth, engineer. There you go. Home recording, all of that sort of stuff. So if you have an interest in that sort of thing, you can start to look at, investing in a home studio or figuring out how to edit or that sort of stuff. Little things you can do better. I think self-taping right now is happening. It's, there's not a ton of production work, but the industry is going that direction anyways. So do you have a tripod? Do you know how to edit your own things? Like start to practice that stuff. Um, and you can certainly write. You have time. If you need a little writing group, start one with some friends. Like that's what I also like about when we're talking about accountability. Collaboration creates accountability. If it's me alone, I can give myself every excuse. If I have one other person that I am accountable to, then I will follow through. I'll be more apt to follow through. Um, it's, I would say, you know, it's a tough fit. People are still doing Zoom shows and stuff here and there. And I've done some myself. Um, they're not the same as performing, but there is some version of an endorphin rush that, you know, is fulfilling in some way. Um, but any measure that you can, are there classes that you could take, um, things that you've always been interested in? Like, I've always wanted to take a dialect class. Then you can do that. Like,
Well, Frank, you
there,
can. Yeah.
there you go. See, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like,
Yeah.
all of those sorts of things that you may have not had time or energy for. Now I know that the financial struggle is real as well for a lot of people. So, um, are there other ways that you could go about it? Sure, but I think trying to find a way to stay productive, write stuff down, even if you don't know what its end purpose and goal is going to be. Like, um, uh, if you write longhand, that's cool. Oh, someone said, Yvonne said that there's a dialect class coming up. There you go. See, but like I
Yvonne
use the
sliding
notes.
in. Yeah.
Well done. Yeah, there you go.
That's our director
Um,
for anybody.
um, I use the notes section of my phone for ideas and things, like, because I almost always have my phone, and if I want to back it up or email it to myself or whatever. So like, you never know what you're going to use, but um, there's a fair amount of, like, I imagine that we all as a globally have a fair amount of, like, whatever, depression or kind of just like ugh and lack of motivation, right? So I understand that, and that's a very real thing. um but if you can just do anything and incrementally, then that's good. Nobody, we probably all convinced ourselves at the beginning of this, like, at the end of quarantine I'm gonna have 2 plays, 3 musicals, 1 movie, like, maybe that you can do that, and great if you are.
Yeah.
But
And a six
most people,
pack.
yeah, and a 6 pack, yeah, exactly. um but like, yeah, anything you can do, I would say. um I 2 things that I have done or are in process of doing, because I felt a need to be creative, is I'm not very good at social media, but I created. I was really inspired by all those commercials that were coming on when the quarantine started, like, in these uncertain times, like all these corporations saying that they care about us. So I created a fake ad agency, and I'm working with a bunch of people to create fake ads or use real ads and repurpose them with a different voiceover. So I've done that. That's helped me keep me creative and being satirical. Uh, and I'm just starting working on a project with a colleague of amplifying voices of marginalized groups, BIPOC and LGBTQIA, like, to uh, work with them about a series of videos about what's challenging about working in the entertainment industry for them specifically. So we're starting to work on that to kind of hear those voices and see some of the challenges that some of us may have never heard of because we have some privilege. So that's cool. That's just starting, but it's literally, at this point, it's a Google form, you know, with some emails and stuff. But like, trying to do something positive, because the world can be pretty depressing, and the news every day can be a little depressing. So, trying to do something to keep the hustle, and that's the best you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a big piece of that is, like you said, take care of your mental health. Take care of the people that are close to you, and make sure to, stay in touch, but also adding structure back into your life. If I have been a person that I've been home for basically 3 months. My work has been closed. Obviously the industry has been closed outside of a handful of commercial auditions that are, we want to see your living room, or we want to see your kitchen, and show that whatever. Structure has been gone. If I didn't have a puppy that needed to be taken out every single day, I don't think I'd have a regular sleep schedule, even remotely close to normal life. But that is one of the nice things about getting into classes, or getting into any type of system, or regulated thing, is it gives you something to show up to. It gives you
Hmm.
time structure. It gives you something to prepare for, and just gives just a hint of purpose back. And for me, that's been a big motivator.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's tough. It's, and we all have our good days and our bad days. So I think, yeah, routine, like there's parts of me sometimes where I'm like, what is it like to leave?
Yeah.
Sometimes like that memory, because I still have this instilled since I have a very irregular schedule. One of the first things I do is I wake up and I would look at my calendar to see like, okay, what do I have to do today? And I still kind of do that, but that's sometimes depressing because there's not much on it now, right? But even then, like I find that I have less to do. Some of the time it's even harder to get to go do those things, like harder to motivate to go do those things because I'm
Yeah.
just out of practice.
Yeah, when you
So
feel like you
I
have,
get it.
a couple hours to squeeze everything in, it's like you actually get stuff done in those couple hours versus like I've got 14 hours to do things with. Video games are fun. Video games are
Yeah.
very fun. Um,
And that's part of our self-care.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Yvonne is asking if they get their packets together through your pitch packet class and getting their materials, will you help our students kind of get towards the next steps and how to actually get those to industry people?
Absolutely. I can certainly, I can't guarantee anything would happen and people, but I can try my best to use my folks that I know and see if they can look at it or if there are things that I can pass up, I absolutely would do so. Um, there's the cool thing about writing is in a lot of ways, it can come from anywhere. It's a relatively level playing field. In television writing, they're always, always, always going to attach a network approved showrunner to your show if you're an unproven writer. So somebody's going to take a piece of your pie. That's how it works. Um, uh, that's just the way it is. But for the most part, if it's a good idea, it can go. It still needs to get through the gates and someone needs to pass it up. So I will try my best to pass it up and at the very least see if I have people that can take a look at it and maybe give you further feedback or pass it on to their people.
Yeah, if you can get your people to contact my people to contact their people, that would be great.
That's exactly all we do.
Well, yeah, wonderful. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna know we're a little bit past the hour, so guys, if you have any more questions, feel free to email them to us, info@yalestudiosatl.com, or you can hit them on the Superhero Training Center website. Also, I'm going to go ahead and put in the let me button. There we go. That way I don't have to hold my space bar. You can send a contact form through our website or an email directly to us through either of those methods. Also, superherotrainingcenter.com/classes if you want to sign up for Frank's upcoming pitch 4-week workshop. Sorry. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Frank, thank you so much for your time and for your
My
information.
pleasure. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, guys.